Welcome to the Designing Hollywood podcast in association with the John Campea Show. I am your host, Robert Meyer Burnett. This episode is sponsored by Paris Costumes International. Today's guest is a Guild Award-nominated costume designer. Born in England to parents of Caribbean and African descent and primarily raised in Canada, she started out in fashion design and had what she calls her Oprah aha moment when the costume designer credits suddenly caught her eye during a screening of the 1980s film starring Bette Midler, Beaches. Now, decades later, her work can be seen on TV shows like House of Cards, Falling Skies, Star Trek Discovery, and films such as Black Panther, for which she assisted the film's costume designer, Ruth Carter, with research for her Oscar-winning designs, which led to her most recent work, The Incredible Woman King. Throughout her career, she has honed a keen stylistic eye, bringing a new, sleeker, and female-led look to the Star Trek series Star Trek Discovery. She draws inspiration from both high-end fashion designers such as Alexander McQueen and Iris Van Herpen, and athletic brands like Nike and Lululemon to create gender-free looks meant to convey power, no matter who is wearing them. She designed the first 3 seasons of Star Trek Discovery, and her professional career spans almost 30 years. For her outstanding work, she has earned 3 Costume Designers Guild Awards and the Canadian Film Artist, it's such a long acronym, I don't know the entire thing, but the awards at the CAFT-CAD Awards. And then, of course, she outfitted the literal army for the Woman King. Without further ado, it is our great pleasure to welcome costume designer Gersha Phillips to the Designing Hollywood Show. Welcome to the show.
Oh, hi. Pleased to be here. Thank you.
It's great to have you here. And I'll try not to geek out as a lifelong Star Trek fan, but before we started recording, I had to say I love going back on this show and looking into people's past credits. And I mentioned I loved Narc, a movie that doesn't get enough love. And I thought you brought the costumes to that. That film has a great look to it, inspired by sort of 70s cop thrillers like French Connection. Narc brought that sort of grungy feel, and I thought those costumes, man, you believed those characters, and that started out with your costume design. So kudos to you for that. Is there anything you could tell us about working on Narc?
Oh, wow. Thank you. I think like you hit it on the nail, and Joe wanted it to be very real and gritty and, just seated in reality and not have anything unpretentious. And also the French Connection, I think I had to watch. And I can't remember the other film he gave me as a movie to watch. No, not so. Was it? No, I think I probably did watch that one actually. But I think it was. I'm trying to remember. Is it No Way Out? Was there an original No Way Out, or was that what you just mentioned? Sorry, I feel like it's a Gene Hackman. Is it Gene Hackman?
Yeah,
you know what? I'm not going to remember. I do remember. Is No Way Out the movie where is that the one that like Will Smith did a remake of? Or no?
The Conversation. That's what it was, because Will Smith was an enemy of the state, and Gene Hackman came back and played his character. The original was The Conversation in '74, and that makes
okay, that's the one that's the movie that he had me watch. I didn't even know about that movie. He had me watch that one. Yeah, that was what was really cool. And this is one of the things I love about working with different directors is they always, in their research and their journey, they find things that speak to them, and then they share them with you, and it helps inform what you're doing. So that was one of the really cool things about working with Joe. It was a fun ride. It was very low budget, and it was freezing cold. That's what I do remember about that movie, because we shot it in winter. And I think that poor Busta and Ray and Jason were all freezing. And Jason, that scene that he does where he runs outside, and they barefoot actually, and he's wearing just the shirt and the pants, and I forget how cold it was that day, but it was very cold. I don't know how he did that, I have to say. It was pretty amazing.
Well, now I want to take you back and ask you, obviously you started in fashion, but were you a movie fan growing up? Were you, looking into fashion as something, was that interesting you as you were a kid and moving into adulthood?
It's really interesting because I didn't really understand the relationship between movies and fashion when I was younger, but we definitely were a huge movie family. Like I remember we would go out clubbing and stuff with my brothers and our extended friends, and since we all sort of hung out in a similar group, and we would come home after going out at night, like at 2 a.m, and get a movie, watch a movie together, like that kind of thing. So, and I remember that, and also just my brother actually was a movie geek, and he brought in a lot of interesting titles into those movie nights. So it was cool. Yeah, I definitely loved movies. Always have.
Did you have any
So.
early influences? Were there some films that maybe left an impression on you in terms of their costumes or anything like that?
Well, I definitely, I have to say I liked Marilyn's movies actually.
All right.
The John Hughes movies, like Pretty in Pink, and I'm trying to remember the other ones that I remember in particular. The Breakfast Club. Because that's when I was growing up. That was my look. That was, I was into grunge and the whole thing, and trying
Oh,
to, I had an interesting mix of a look for a black girl in a prairie town because I grew up in Saskatchewan. So just trying to be, I think, I leaned into that look quite a bit heavily. I think in terms of, and that also sort of helped me with my start into fashion, because I actually started making sort of like um, breakdancing costumes, which is what I started doing. My boyfriend at the time, his brother had a breakdancing group, and I used to make them like jumpsuits, and things like that, like from I don't know, I'm thinking of like Grandmaster Flash and
oh
and
yeah.
and early hip hop. So that's what I started doing, and then actually more than I'd say film at that time, it was movies. I mean, the music that actually sort of influenced what I was doing, because I started making like baggy clothes and sort of like that sort of urban look, and selling it in stores in Saskatoon. So that's how I started.
Well, it's interesting to hear that because, Marilyn Vance, who obviously is the executive producer and creator of this podcast, she
Mhm.
did work on stuff like Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And I remember meeting her for the first time and still to this day
Mhm.
talking about Matthew Broderick's leather jacket that was in Ferris
Yes. Yeah.
Bueller, which is something that
Mhm.
she had made. And then if you think back to
Mhm.
the Molly Ringwald character was actually like making her
Yeah.
own clothes in Pretty in Pink.
Well,
So,
exactly, and that's what I say. That's what influenced me, because that's what I used to do. Because I couldn't find things that I liked in the store, and I couldn't afford them, so I would get things and remake them. And that's what I started doing, like from the beginning. Even like with dolls' clothes, I feel like that's what I was doing. You know what I mean? So I think I came by all of that naturally. But yeah, I remember being influenced by that movie in particular because it was what she did is what I did. You know what I mean?
right,
And it,
sure.
it was great to see that on the screen. So yeah.
And then also movies of the period. Like I grew up in Seattle, and we didn't have
Hmm.
any real hip hop culture. But so I
Hmm.
remember seeing a movie called Wild Style, and
Hmm.
the from early '80s New York hip hop, and then of course we got like Breakin' and Breakin' Two, and that was
Yeah.
Shabba-Doo and Shabba Ranks and all that. And then I'm still to this day a massive Prince fanatic. And when I
Yes,
saw Purple
exactly.
Rain, I'm like, I want to dress like
Yeah,
Prince, man. But
yeah. No, totally, totally. Yeah.
But it was great
No,
to
that's
have
so true.
those influences. I mean, the mid
Hmm.
'80s, especially with all that fashion. But so,
Exactly.
how did you find your way into fashion?
It was like through making the breakdance costumes for my brother's my boyfriend's brother, and a friend of mine who had a store asked me if I'd be interested in selling some of the clothes that I was making
Oh
in her
wow!
store. And that's how it started. I literally, it was kind of like one of those weird things of just being like in the right place at the right time. She asked me, she was opening a store. It was called View La Moda, and I started making clothes for them, and it was stuff that I would making for myself, and also for my these the guys that I knew, because everybody, after I started making the baggy pants and stuff, everybody wanted the baggy pants. And I remember I made a particular kind of coat that everybody went crazy for. It was just like this shawl collared like winter coat, and I made it for myself, and then I ended up making one for another friend, and he loved it, and people saw it, and it just got around, and that's how it sort of happened. And then for a while, my boyfriend was actually working with me, and we started doing stuff together. We made some really cool suits that sort of had, I would say, kind of like influenced like a little bit like with Duran Duran, but with a baggy hip hop style. So it's kind of like mixing worlds. So we did those kinds of things. We made like super cool suit, a silk one. I remember dyeing like 10 yards of silk black in my bathtub, and everything was black afterwards. So yeah, I mean, that's how it started. And from there, I got a little bit of local notoriety, and did some really cool fashion shows. Actually, we did some really cool sort of alternative looking fashion shows, and then teamed up with some other girls, and we started designing some stuff together as well, and then just kept going and going. And then and eventually I realized, I wanted to get out of Saskatoon. I wanted to move to Toronto, and I actually wanted to go to school a little bit more and study more. And I moved to, I can't remember what year that was, but I moved to Toronto, and instead of going to school, I started working. And it was while I was working for this company, this dressmaker, and he actually had a really large film clientele. And it's really weird, because it clearly was in like somewhere in my brain, this idea of costume design, but not having put it together as a real thing. Because even when I was at university, I decided to go to university in Saskatoon first, and they only had a home economics class. Program. They didn't actually have. That's how you took fashion. You had to take the home economics program. So you took fashion design and interior design together. And so I took that course. And in that course, you could take an elective. And in the elective, I took theater. And in theater, I ended up doing plays. Yeah. And so I was working in the costume department. But it's even in that, I never thought of like, oh, there was a person that actually designed costumes and did that role. I don't know why. It was never clear to me how that all happened. I obviously thought it was some magical thing that happened. But with that day, sitting in the theater, seeing that title, somehow it all just made sense to me. And I was like, yes, that's it. That's what I want to do. So, and I guess it was from watching enough movies and then sort of somehow understanding, without understanding, that's how it all happened.
Well, I love to hear that, you kind of did it on your own. I hear a lot from a lot of costume designers, they went to school and they took a lot of theory. They learned how to cut. But you started that way. You began.
Well, yeah, but I did. I mean, I guess the thing for me is because I learned how to cut, and so outside of school, and then I did go to school and study and took pattern drafting and color theory and did all that as well. And then then when I was and then I felt, oh, I needed to go further with this. I don't know. I at that time too, I had a real love for fashion, and I was obsessed with fashion television, and which Jeannie Becker used to do, and I loved listening to Karl Lagerfeld or John Galliano or any of these guys talk about their collections and what they were doing and the stories that they wound behind their, I mean, in a sense, it's very filmatic, the way they approach their collections.
Right, sure.
And so, yeah, and so I used to love that, and I loved Karl Lagerfeld. I was obsessed with him and his whole approach, and Jean Paul Gaultier to a certain extent. But there was something about the way Karl articulated himself and took you on these journeys that I found really, really fascinating, and his final results and what he was doing. And so I remember when I moved to Toronto, going to this store, it's called The Bay, and going to the store into the women's department and seeing like a Karl Lagerfeld piece for sale and just like going crazy over it. And I think there was Terry Mugler in that store and things like that. And so, those things, sort of cemented my love for fashion. So I've always had that side. And then, I think the film side was there, but I didn't have that connection. And it felt like, to me, I don't know, this lightning bolt or aha moment where the two things sort of went together. And I was like, oh, that's what I want to do. And so I started looking into how can I get into film? And I remember being told that, oh, it's impossible, you can't get in, nobody ever gets in, you know. And I kept just persevered, and I figured there's got to be a way. And I met a boom operator, and he I was doing floral arrangements for a company. I know, side long crazy story, but he was doing a handheld hoop, and he talked to me about joining going to the Canadian Film Center and volunteering. And he said, this is how you can get in. So I ended up doing that. I ended up volunteering on a movie called House, and I worked on this film. You work for free, and you get like pro bono, you get paid at the end.
Like the horror film House?
No, it wasn't the horror film.
Okay.
No, it wasn't the horror film. It was just this lovely film by a director called Laurie Lind. And I think the writer was, I can't remember his name. I can see his face. Stephen. Can't remember. Anyway, but the director was Laurie Lind, and that was my first project. And I started off as a costume assistant and ended up keying the set by the end of the movie.
Wow.
My other thing that I did, I learned something really very important that I ended up, because I glued earrings onto, I was fixing a pair of earrings, and I glued them onto the actress's ear, which was a very frightening experience. But other than that, it went really well. And it was a really great experience, because, when you work on these sort of indie films, you get to do more than you normally would do, and I just had some really great experiences on it. And from there, I did design 2 shorts, and then, ended up joining the unions, and so on and so forth. And that's it. That's the beginning.
Well, it's interesting because at the same time, like when you were coming up, and I'm going by the IMDb and your credits, you had people like Jean-Paul Gaultier was hired to design The Fifth Element.
Yes, exactly.
And
yeah.
that was not something. I mean, there was always designers that would give designs. I mean, like, I'm a huge Tom Ford fan. Tom Ford would design Daniel Craig's clothing for a movie, but to have Gaultier do the whole film,
And
The Fifth Element, I think, benefited greatly from that. And
absolutely. It's so wackadoodle and crazy and fabulous at the same time, right? Yeah, it's actually one of my favorites. I love to look at that one. If I'm doing sci-fi, I will have a look. Depending on what I'm doing, I will definitely have a little look at that, just as a little, like, what's going on there.
coming out of the 80s, you got to work on American Psycho. I mean, that was a movie that had to recreate those 80s power suits, and I know you were only the assistant on that, but was that fun to work on something like that? And I would have thought
it was amazing.
Yeah, it must have been right up
such
your
a great experience. Yeah. Oh no, it was fantastic. I really, really had the best time, and I worked with E.C. Smithsendin, who's amazing.
Yes,
and a very generous designer to work with. Like, she had gave me a lot to do, and it was a really, really fabulous experience. I learned so much from her on that movie. It was great, really great.
Yeah, she's amazing. Yeah. I was actually able to meet her on Chronicles of Narnia: The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And then her brother Roger's a casting director,
casting agent. Yeah.
In the family there. But that film is it's never lost any of its power. I just recently rewatched it, and the clothes in that movie are the best. We managed to do some really, I mean, it was a really great experience. Like, we worked with Sharuti, who rebuilt some of their suits, and made, like, they sent us their books, and we were able to pick the fabrics and the cuts and remake them for Christian. So that was super exciting and cool. And then EC had a really great relationship with Patricia Field, and was able to go to her warehouse in New York and pull the stuff that we used for the club scenes. So I got to see all this amazing Patricia Field stuff from the 80s, and it was mind-boggling. It was really fabulous. Now, what was it like for you you said you designed shorts, but when you went from feature films, when you went from assisting to becoming the costume designer, was that at all intimidating for you, or had you had so much experience by then it was just a natural step to just take?
I think, the first thing I did this thing called, I did a very low budget feature but my first one that I call, like, it wasn't a union, it was still non-union, but it was like the first, I don't know, real feature, I call it. It was called Prisoner of Love, and it was a feature, and it was starred Naomi Campbell actually was in it. And I remember it, and I remember getting the movie because I remember going, and I thought they had a costume designer, but they had somebody that they had in mind, and I decided that, okay, I'm going to try to get this job. So I put together this presentation, and I always, went a little overboard and just did something really fabulous, and wowed the director with my presentation. And so I feel like, being a Black person and a Black woman in this industry and just in life in general, there's always this thing that you were taught as you were growing up, that you have to be the best you can. You have to, work really hard for what you get. So for me, my approach was always to be the best, to do a lot of work, and just really, sort of, in some ways I think I'm a little over the top in the way I approach those things. And I do go too far, and I don't need to, but I still do, even when I'm doing my stuff. I know for the Women King, for instance, I went like crazy overboard. But, I feel like if you really want to stand out and be seen, sometimes you have to do that. And I feel like when I started, that was sort of my MO. I kind of was always doing more than I needed to, probably. And that's sort of how I sort of compensated. If I felt a little insecure, that would give me a little extra boost. And I think also what that does is, like, when you're doing the film, because you've done so much ahead, like so much research, and you already sort of shot the show in your head, you have all that done. So when you're starting to work on it, you can actually pop it out pretty fast. It goes pretty well for you. So it's sort of like a lot of pre-work almost before you get the movie, that by the time you got the movie, you're already on the way. So that sort of worked really well in my favor.
Do you do a lot of research? I mean, a lot of costume designers say they just immerse themselves in everything from art history to, depending on what the project is. So research
Exactly.
is incredibly important to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love to, like, when I'm doing certain things, I'll surround my room. Like, my room is like covered, the walls are covered with images. I remember, I think it was Marilyn Monroe when we did the Secret Life of Marilyn. Like, we had it, the office had so many pictures, because I feel like for sure she was probably, I think I've heard this said, that she was the most photographed person. And so even as we thought we had every picture of Marilyn when we were doing our prep, we still kept finding them. And then in the end, it became a thing that we were sharing them between the hair and makeup and the director. We would share new images. Oh, have you seen this one? Have you seen this one? Because we would still be finding them. So it was really interesting. But yeah, the research part is great. I mean, I always consider, I think for me, I call it, I don't know if other people do, but I like to refer to the beginning as the honeymoon period. It's like when you get the script, you read it, you're excited. It's really great, and it's exciting. And then, you start having meetings, and those are going pretty well, and it's great until you have that one about the budget collapses and everything starts to fall apart, because you're like, okay, reality sets in, and it changes. So, but that is sort of like my favorite part of the movie part, is like the prep, and that especially the early prep, when you're starting to do the the research and finding out where you're going to sort of start going and making some early decisions. It's just kind of can be really a lot of fun.
Now, when you begin prep on a project, do you start, obviously you have the script to work from, but do you like to know who's in the movie first, or do you start working right off the script and coming up with ideas and tear sheets or whatever? How does that process begin for you?
For me, usually it's from the script, because a lot of the times you don't know who's in it, and
Right.
it's and it sometimes that changes it, and sometimes it doesn't, because it's just, that really depends on the person that you end up, that ends up being cast. But yeah, I sort of love to I get into it right away. Like, as soon as I read something, you start to visualize. I think we're all very visual, and that's what sort of happens. So you start to, things come up. And then as you're going through your day, you start pulling. You know what I mean? That's why I'm very careful. I remember, especially when I was doing Star Trek, what I watched, because I was like, I feel like I'm just like a sponge, and everything just ends up being in my costumes. So I'll try not to. I remember specifically not watching any Game of Thrones whenever I was doing it, because I felt like I kept trying to put Game of Thrones into our show and other things. So I know that happens to me a lot. Like, I'll just start pulling things. Everything sort of just comes in and goes back out. So yeah, it's I feel like there's so much that influences what we do, and in terms of costume design and all of this, interior, whatever it is, any design sort of medium that we work in, that really everything that it's like you just take it all in and then you put it through and then it comes back out as whatever it needs to be, which is really cool. It's a cool process.
When you've worked with Don Cheadle more than
Hmm.
once, and
Yes.
favorite actor of mine. I'm a huge Don
Mhm.
Cheadle fan. Obviously,
Mhm.
he's in the MCU now,
Yes, he
but
is.
and he'll be back. He's coming back in the MCU. When you work
Mhm.
with actors and you first see an actor, or you're going to work with an actor, do you go back
Mhm.
and look at what they've looked like in previous films, and or do you develop?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, how does that work?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. 'Cause it's really telling on. I mean, obviously they change depending on the character that they're playing, and that's also a really interesting thing, is to see people morph into something when they put on a costume and they come out for the first time. Actually, I just remembered, I worked with Philip Seymour Hoffman on a movie called Oni Mahoney,
Hmm.
and I remember the first day we had this crazy incident happen where the tailor that was making our suits for him disappeared. So I had to go talk to him and say, I don't know if we're going to have your suit. So we've got these other suits. I had to have a fitting. The first day of camera, I had to have a fitting with Philip in the morning at like 5 o'clock in his trailer, and put some other suits on. And then, of course, our tailor did show up and everything was fine. He just, whatever, he chose not to communicate with us. but but I remember putting his stuff in his room, finally the proper suit, and walking out. And then I just stood just to go back. I went back to just check on him. And it was really interesting just to watch him like come out and like his body change, like everything that he did, like just in terms of changing like his body and his persona into this character, into this Brian Mahoney character. It was really, really amazing. Like he was something else to see, I have to say. But and then speaking of Don, yeah, like Don, we've worked on 5 projects now. Like the first thing I worked on him was a movie called, it was an MOW, I think it was, called The Earl Manigault Story, and I was doing set for Denise Cronenberg. And I was in awe of him then, because I think he had just done Devil with a Blue Dress or something like that, had just come out, and it was just after that. And actually, I worked with so many amazing actors on that show. It was mind-boggling for me. That was my first meeting with Ruth Carter. I worked with James Earl Jones was on that. Forrest Whitaker was on that. Loretta Devine was on it. Like it was just like not Shirley Ralph wasn't on it, but her brother was on it. Like there was so many amazing actors on that show that was just really wild. But yeah, anyway, that was the first time I worked with Don, and then then the second time I worked with him was with Casey Lemons, when I
Oh yeah,
talked to me, yeah, which was a great experience as well, because that was one where Don actually got to transform, and that was fun to watch him do that. And he also, he would play. It was that character. It was over 3 decades. I think we went
hmm
from like 60s to 80s with that.
yeah,
So that
yeah.
was cool. Yeah, yeah. And then we did that. Then we did Traitor, the sort of spy thriller movie. And then I worked with him as a actor when he did Miles Ahead.
Yeah,
So that
yeah,
was really cool too.
which I love. I
Yeah.
I learned. Well, I didn't. It didn't stick. But I
Mm.
started playing trumpet in 6th and 7th grade because I wanted to be
Oh,
Miles
God.
Davis. And I
Oh,
realized I
wow.
was never going to be Miles Davis. I'm a huge Miles Davis fan. Still to this day, I got to see him
Yeah.
perform once at
Hmm.
Seattle's Bumper
Oh,
Shoot Arts
cool.
Festival. It was amazing to see Miles Davis.
Wow. Wow. Amazing.
Couldn't get enough.
That
But
sounds amazing.
I love that film. I thought that was a
Hmm. Hmm.
beautifully done film. That must have been fun to do research on because man,
Yeah, it was. It was actually. It was a lot of fun. It was
because
a lot of fun. It
Miles had
was
a
another.
whole, like his jazz. He had whole eras of clothing that he wore.
Yeah, he
Different.
did. He did.
So
Yeah, and he was quite a style man. Quite
oh,
quite stylish. Yeah, he was very
amazing.
slick.
Well, so
Yeah. No, it was a
it's
lot of
interesting.
fun.
You brought up Denise Cronenberg. I'm a
Hmm.
huge David Cronenberg fan, and Denise works
Hmm.
because she's his sister,
Yeah.
is David's sister,
Yeah.
And it's interesting that
Yeah,
David Cronenberg's on Star Trek now, which is crazy.
I know. I know.
That's
I
crazy.
know, and it was so funny because I always thought I would never ever work with him, and then finally I did get to work with him.
And
You
he's
know, because he was
great.
on.
He's great on
Oh,
Discovery.
he was wonderful. He was so great to work with. He's lovely, absolutely lovely, I have to say.
But it had
And
to
it
have
was
been.
a lot. It was everybody was besides themselves working with him. We were all losing our minds that he
Oh,
was on our show.
yeah, he's the best. I mean, he's turned up in like he was in a Don McKellar movie called Last
Yes,
Night, where
yes.
he worked for the power company, and before the world ended, he was calling every one of the customers, thanking them for being good customer of the power company. Thank you very much.
Oh wow, I don't even remember that.
Yeah, I mean,
I
you know the
do remember that movie because my friend did that movie. Leah Carlson designed it. Yeah, that was a great movie last night. I
I
love
love
that.
that film. I mean, the Canadian film industry might be small, but it's got
Yeah,
a lot of great like Adam McGowan and
yeah, some
Cronenberg
great
and
director.
and Sarah
Yeah,
Polley and
Jenny
all
Arcand.
great stuff. Oh yeah, yeah, great. Oh, Danny
Yeah,
Arcand's great. And who's
yeah.
who? He's like from Winnipeg. Guy Madden. Is it Guy Madden?
Oh yes, Guy Madden.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Done
So
some really cool things as well.
so
Yeah,
you guys up
exactly.
there up north, you do get to work on lots of cool things up there. So
Yes, yes.
in addition to this work, you have worked on a lot of well, call it fantasy, science fiction, things like Falling Skies,
Mhm,
which I really liked,
mhm,
The Mortal
mhm,
Instruments, City of Bones,
mhm.
Star Trek. I mean, are you a fan of science fiction, fantasy, and horror? Did you grow up as a fan of that genre, those genres?
Um, Yeah, I guess I did. It's interesting because in our family we have people that love it and people that don't. Like my brother and I love sci-fi and fantasy, and then my sister doesn't. So it's always interesting when we get to watch movies. But I'm also really I don't like thrillers very much, so I'm like a wimp when it comes to some of the things. Like I loved Alien, but then I like it's so scary to watch. I've spent half my time watching it with my eyes covered. But it's a pretty amazing franchise as well. But yeah, no, I love sci-fi. And actually I remember before I did Star Trek, because City of Bones was the closest I guess I got to, it's more fantasy, but
Yeah,
still pretty present day oriented in terms of costumes, except for the sort of otherworldly characters.
sure.
So I felt like, oh, I don't know if I'm ever going to get to do sci-fi and do that. And then Star Trek ends up falling into my lap, which was a pretty wild ride. And getting to do that, it was incredible. It was such a great experience. I really, just going on the space ride. And then, of course, we were only on it and we think we're doing really great. And then, of course, they decide to bump us, another 1,000 years into the future, which was
Well,
nuts.
yeah. Okay. Since you brought it up, and since we're at Star Trek, I'm going to try and contain myself. But Star
Mm,
Trek has an incredible legacy of costume design,
hmm
going all the way back to even the first rejected pilot, the Cage.
Yes, with
But
Pike. Yes, of
yeah, with
course.
Pike,
Hmm
the original series was you had obviously the mandate was it had to be colorful because at the time you were
hmm
transitioning from
hmm
black and white to color television. That's why they were trying to
hmm
sell color TVs, and you had the gold, the velour, the gold, the blue, the red, and then of
Yeah, yeah.
course the
hmm
female the women's costumes on Star Trek
Yes.
were I
Very
mean
scandalous.
very scandalous, an incredible man. And
Yeah.
even as progressives, they talk about having Nichelle Nichols on the bridge of the Enterprise. I have to
Mhm.
say, she was the first woman I ever had a massive crush on. And there's an episode called Mirror Mirror where she had an
Mhm.
exposed midriff in the mirror universe, and I'm like,
Yes.
okay, I'm like 6 years old, going, that's what I want when I grow up is someone like Michelle Nichols, and yet
Nice.
it was still go-go boots and mini skirts, and so
Mhm.
it was
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah, yeah,
But that shaped
yeah.
beauty for me, in my mind, all the
Mhm.
guest stars, and then of course you went from the original series to Star Trek: The Motion Picture, where
Mhm.
it was not revealing. Everyone's wearing these sort of
Yeah.
unisex, monochromatic. The color
Mhm, mhm,
coding was only on the insignias and not on the costumes anymore. And then you
mhm,
had the Mighty
mhm.
Maroons in Star Trek 2, where everyone's wearing pea coats as if they're on the conning tower of a nuclear submarine or something. So when you came on board to do Star
Mhm.
Trek for the first time, you had a rich lineage of costumes to draw from. You had obviously Next Generation and Deep Space Nine and Voyager and Enterprise. How did you begin? What was the mandate? Did Alex Kurtzman and company tell you, okay, we want this, or were you given carte blanche to start from scratch and do whatever, wherever your talent took you?
Well, when I started, it was actually Brian Fuller who was we were working with, and I was not designing. I was working with Sudarat Lalard, I think is how you say her last name. And so she was working with Brian on what's that? The series?
Was it Hannibal?
No, not Hannibal. The one after Hannibal. Oh my gosh, I can't remember. American Gods. Yeah. They were doing American Gods, and then he wanted her to go to do Star Trek Discovery, but she was still finishing American Gods. So I was brought in to help her transition over and to start it up for her. So in the end, they said, because I was a designer and I wasn't really interested in that, I said, okay. They said, well, you can also design. So you guys will co-design the first couple episodes or however I was supposed to stay for. So it's looking like it was going to be about 2 episodes. And I was like, okay, well, I could do that. That sounds like something to do. And of course, my brothers were besides themselves. So they were like, you have to do this. You have to do this at Star Trek. And I was like, do I? And then so I ended up, then it was mostly by being persuaded by my brothers that I ended up starting the show. So I started the show, and Brian's mandate, funny enough, was he wanted it to be very different from anything that had happened before. And so that was the mandate we started with. And Sudarat's mandate was that she didn't understand why Space always removed the collar. She was like, why do they do that? The collar has been around for centuries, the shirt, and it's been the staple of man's dress for so long. It wouldn't just disappear because we go to space. And I realized that mostly that happened because most of space costumes started in the 60s when there was the mock neck and, that whole collarless, the Mandarin shirt, all of that look was very popular. And that's what was like pushing edge fashion at the time. So that's what they put in, that's what they used for space. And so that's what I realized. So I said, okay, that makes sense to me. Why it was that? So we decided we were going to keep a collar. So that was our starting point. And then, Brian left the show, and Sudarat left with Brian, and I was the last person standing. And so Alex and Secret Hideout asked me if I would take over, and I was like, okay, I'll do it till Christmas. We'll see how it goes. And so till Christmas lasted for 5 years. It took us 1.5 years to get the first season out. And I think we went through a couple changes. Like our original idea with the uniforms, we stayed with the original idea in the beginning, and we had the 3 colors, but they had changed the colors into these sort of muted colors. And when we did the camera test on the ship, nobody liked it. Everybody was like, this isn't working. They didn't like the colors that were picked. We had all the fabric dyed in Switzerland. It was wild. It was the wildest thing ever I'd ever experienced, because we found this really amazing company called Schuler, and we used them to make so we had to buy, like you buy 200 meters and you get it dyed each color. So each color had its own. And at that time too, we had a pants and a jacket color. So I think it was blue with navy pants. The gold was with brown pants. And then the other color was the red was with brown pants. And then the gold was with green pants, olive pants. So we had all of that fabric dyed. It was bananas. And then, this thing was, we decided we didn't like it. So then we started playing around with other ideas. And simultaneously, I think I said we should do navy and the metallics. And the director or the producers that took over sent me an email from, I forget who it was, some company, and they had navy with metallics, the 3 colors, the three metals. And so we were like in sync practically with the idea. And then that's how we started doing the uniforms. And the compression panels on the side, that was a journey too. I can't even remember how that came up, how we started with that. But the idea was that the suit would be able to compressurize, and those would be life monitoring. They would have life monitoring function, so they would monitor your stats. So that was the idea behind it, and there was thought that they may actually use that as a story point. It never did happen, but that was the idea at the beginning there.
Sure.
And that's where that first suit came from. And you know what? For me, I do like the second group that we came up for the 32nd century, but I do still love those first ones, the blue with the gold and the copper and the and the silver ones.
Well, it was
Yeah.
unique also to Star Trek.
Hmm.
It was very much when you see those, you know that okay, those are Discovery uniforms.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
in the
So we did
second
get a lot of flack in the beginning, but then eventually people liked it, I think. The
yeah, I mean, it
fans.
was just different. It was,
Yeah, no, exactly.
and let me
Exactly.
ask you
And
this.
that's not liked a lot, I think, in these franchises.
Well, I think the producers, and I mean, this was Brian too when he first started. The
Mhm.
show is a prequel to the original series by not that
Yes.
many years, so
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
very much a departure. The designs are all
Yeah.
very much a departure from the original series. They called it obviously visual reboot, a
Mhm.
visual reimagining. But in the
Yeah.
second season of Discovery, when we meet
Well,
the crew of
yes,
the
that's when they try to
Enterprise.
bring it back
I
together.
have to say that was a very, bringing those colors back, the gold and
Mhm.
the reds, the blues. That was a very
Mhm.
interesting choice, the way you went about
Mhm.
doing that, because it was
Mhm.
redolent of the original series, but the design, the actual design of the structure was very interesting.
Mhm.
And where did you
Mhm. Mhm.
come up with that and the asymmetrical collars and things like that? It was really unique, and again, it was very unique to the second season of Discovery, and I thought it was a really
Mhm.
unique design choice. How did you
Mhm.
settle upon that for the crew
Well,
of
I
the
think
Enterprise?
it's actually the same exact costume as the disco costume. It's just in the colors. So you don't really, I guess you don't, because it's all blue, you don't notice that the collar is that asymmetrical, but it's basically the same color. So what my thought was, we could, rather than, come up with a completely different uniform, if we're saying that they're still part of the same organization, it made more sense if the uniform was the same. But the idea was that they were wearing the newer versions of the uniform, and that Disco was wearing the older version, and that's sort of what we kind of said. So when we did it, we took the same. They're wearing the exact same thing. We just in the Enterprise, we toned the compression panels the same color as the jacket, so it doesn't have that contrast.
Mm.
It's the same color, so everything blends much nicer together.
Were they
And
different
then
fabrics? Were they from the?
no, actually, the same fabric. Same fabric. We had the same fabric dyed in those colors, and yeah, that's how we went about doing that. So it just felt like a better evolution. And when I suggested it to Alex and Olatunde, they both were like, "Yeah, that sounds great," and they liked the idea. So that's how we went with that. Um, but then, of course, when Akiva went to do Strange New World, he was like, "No, I don't want those ones. I want it to be back to the original." So
Right.
no, that's with another. When I worked with that was, I co-designed that with Bernadette, and it was like, so we had to come up with another one. So we tried to still keep the shapes that we had created, like with the rather than just going with a simple T-shirt, we still kept it a little square. They have a little bit of shoulder pads in
Mm-hmm.
them, but it definitely has more of a throwback to the original, and I think people really like that and are very happy. So that's a good thing, I guess.
Yeah,
You
again,
know.
it harks back more to the
Yeah.
original series as well.
Yeah,
Now,
and that's Akiva's mandate. He really wanted to lean into the nostalgia, like even the green Pike jacket. He wanted that jacket. Oh no, it was the Kirk jacket, but he wanted Pike to wear that jacket. And a lot of the things, he wants always to lean back into that to the past. And actually, even Alex, when he took over Disco, that was what our mandate was as well. That so we always kept looking, like anything that we did always went back to the original and revamped it, sort of thing.
and then like you just said,
So,
you had to jump 1,000 years into the future. How did
yeah.
you how did you begin to sort of reimagine not just the Federation, but what humanity would be like? I mean, considering like if you look back at our own history 1,000 years ago, we were wearing very different things back then.
Well, that's when I start always, and I literally was like, I don't think that people would be wearing clothes. I think they're all going to just have their costumes, or their clothing is going to be how did I say it? It was because I've heard of this thing where they're doing this where you can have your the clothing, you wear something neutral, and it's like I guess it's what am I saying? What am I trying to say? It's what's the word? Projected. There we go.
Right.
It's the clothing is projected on. So that's what it's like. That's going to be the future. But of course, you can't do that on film, and it doesn't work. So we did a couple of things in the very beginning episode where I believe it's possibly what could be the future, where the man, I forget what his name is, but he's the one that's been waiting for for the
Federation
Starfleet
to
to
come
come
back.
back.
Yeah.
Federation to come back, and he's waiting, and so when he gets up, his costume morphs on, and then that scene that I was like, that's probably because I do, like, you can already tell like what happened during the pandemic when nobody left, they all just stayed at home, they only put on their tops, and then the bottoms were wearing whatever, you know what I mean? So I do feel like the future definitely is going to be some version of that, where we probably will show up in holographic form, which we did show in our in that season as well, when we go to the Mercantile Exchange.
Yeah.
Everybody's they're all holograms as opposed to being really there. And so as a hologram, you can be in whatever you want to be in. But that didn't really help us because we were like in, 1919 or whatever year that was, 1920, 2020, sorry. And, you only have the technology and about the fabrics of what you have in that time. So I think for me, like, even when I started Star Trek in the beginning, I was always about whatever we can do to make our seams and our fabrications as streamlined as possible. That's the way we have to go. And so we had already started working with like no-sew tapes and all of these different types of constructions in terms of building, so that you would see less of how you build, see less stitching, et cetera, et cetera. Like the zippers we were using, we sort of used reverse coil so that you couldn't see the zipper on the front. And just other things like that. So what we did for later, we tried to push that further. So we got a different fabric for the uniforms. It's a little bit sleeker. We bonded a material underneath that gave it this sort of, I call it loftiness. It's the only way I could think of describing it, because what it does is it just raises it off the body a little bit. And so it sort of, I mean, it doesn't really look like a hologram, but in my mind, it kind of sort of does. You know what I mean? Like, it just looks a little otherworldly. Sure. And I think the fact that we, the fabricate, the lines are very simple and very clean, and that to me was what sort of represented what could be the future, And so our approach was just to make it as simple. And even our insignia, like we used. We made those like printing them, like 3D printing them, and then molding them out of a urethane plastic, and then chroming them, and gluing them on so that they're very, very fine. We found all these ways of doing things that make it really sleek and very thin. And so I think, to me, it kind of works in a way if you squint slightly. And it is tricky because you've got your Federation, but then you've got to think about your other species and how they all evolved, like the Campeians, how we evolved the Campeians and what that looked like. So it was an interesting journey in terms of, I called it, I want to use a swear word, but it was a mind bend. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it was just like, because you have to really twist your brain around to sort of come up with some of these ideas and then, you make rules for yourself that you try to stay in for species, because you want to sort of like keep them clean. So, you want to, so the Federation has this look, and it always, everything that applies to the Federation should have that sort of feel to it. And then when we did the Campeians, we had another set of rules, and so on and so forth, so that we could sort of create species looks that sort of had their own identities. Well, that was sort of the plan.
One of my favorite costumes on the show is Michelle Yeoh's Mirror Universe Empress costume.
Oh, yes, that's fabulous.
And that was a great look. Was it fun for you to revisit the Mirror Universe that goes all the way back to the second season of the original series?
Yes, it was. It was fun the first time, and like a mountain. No, because it was like we were told. I forget when Tunde told us that we were going to be doing the Mirror Universe, and that he wanted an army. We needed to create armor because they were going to be fighting all the time. So we needed to create armor for them, and then what that armor could look like. So it was very interesting in terms of the journey that I went on for that, and we went on. I feel like in that particular way, I think I've talked about this before, but my illustrator, Christian Cordella, who was doing the illustrations with me on that, he really helped in terms of what that final look looked like. Because I knew we wanted it to be brutalist, and we wanted the design to be brutalist, but all I had time to tell him about, I found this leather sort of, I think it was I don't even know where it came from. It was something that I had found, and it was leather, and it was sort of filigree leather layer, layered on top of each other. And I said, I want this look, but I need it to look brutalist. And I gave it to him, and then he came up with that, the pattern that we actually did do. And when I was like, this is perfect. So like, I have to credit him for that because, I mean, sure, it's the two of our minds coming together, but that final, the look of it definitely has a lot to do with him. And so, and then, how we went about building it, the leather, that first group we did all with molded leather. When we did it the second time, we did it molding it, but then creating a 3D, not 3D prints. Did we? Oh, actually, we did. We 3D printed them and then made them that way, and they were much better and more beautiful the second time we did it. The second when we did it in the season 3, I think it was.
Yeah, that was
season 3. Yeah,
I think we season 3. Well, now,
season 3 when she goes through the Garden of Forever.
Yes.
Yeah.
Paul Guilfoyle, the Guardian.
Yes, Paul Guilfoyle.
So I've got to ask you. You worked on Star Trek, because I could keep you here for another hour talking about Star Trek. But I must refrain, and I have to say, The Woman King. What a knockout, Viola Davis. I mean, I've always loved her, but my God, was she fierce! And that film was. Yeah. It's interesting. I didn't know much about that. I think that there's a lot of history now that is coming to the fore because of the movie. But, I couldn't help but think, my God, like, I'm a huge fan of the costumes of the Dora Milaje and Black Panther.
Yeah.
The costumes in Black Panther, as you know. I'm interviewing Ruth tomorrow.
Oh, are you?
Yeah.
Tell her I said hey.
I will tell her you say hello. The costume design in Black Panther was just. Now I know Marvel has their visual design department, but it's one thing to design something; it's a whole nother thing to realize it in 3 dimensions and to put it on actors. Now, again, for The Woman King, you had to design a whole army. Now, and as we talked about before, right before this interview, John Boyega put up a video of him putting on these robes, and he was having a great time with this. For a movie like The Woman King, how do you begin? How did you start?
Well, I think with all projects, it starts with the script, and then you start the research. I mean, that's always going to be your benchmark starting point. And like I say, like the research for this is endless. Like, I feel like I could still be researching if we were making the movie. I still would be, because it's just mountains of it to go through. And also, for us, one of the things we did find out was not until a lot later that a lot of the images that you do see when you Google the Goji, that the cowrie shell breastplates, the skirt of that look was actually a redress by Europeans for the World Trade Fair. Yeah, it's that, and we didn't find out till just before we started shooting. But what started me thinking that was that I couldn't find the description of that costume anywhere, like that uniform. There's nowhere anywhere does it mention them wearing that. It was in the script, but it's not in any of the descriptions of what they wore when they fought was not anywhere, and not in any of the different eras that I read about. And so we realized that. I talked to Jane about it, and so we were all looking for it, and it wasn't until they had hired this historian, and he said, yes, that's what happened. It's a redress by the Europeans for the World Trade Fair, and what they actually wore were there were different things that were a comment depending on the eras, and when we started in 1823, so we're just a little later than the first version, which would have been like the men's pants, and then it looks like they may have just bound their chest or maybe been topless. The idea was that they would dress very similarly to the men, and so when they were fighting. So with that in mind, we sort of came up with certain parameters that we could use for film, because there was ratings issues, so we had to make sure that people's breasts were covered, et cetera, et cetera. So we came up with the 2 tops for the battle uniform, the bandeau, and then the halter, which the halter comes from a lot of images of women just wearing these white cross straps that they would wear, and then they would what I thought it was like that's what they used to hold their weapons, possibly, and other things. So we kept that idea, and that's where the halter sort of comes from, and then came up with the bandeau, and the pants we need for fighting, obviously, because they were just all it was and then a little piece of the skirt wrap, and I really wanted to have indigo in the uniform because I felt that was really important, knowing they were from West Africa, and wanted to have that sort of language in the costume. So we ended up, the first version of that I showed Gina it was blue, and it just had a bordered print on it. And it was funny. She looked at it the first day and she was like, yeah, I like it. And I was like, okay, we got the go ahead. We're going to get this started. And we started working on it. And then the next day she comes back to me. She says, you know what, Gersha, I just don't think it looks African enough. It needs to look more, I want to see more Africa in it. So then I showed her some other prints, and we chose one, and it was similar to the one we actually used, but a little bigger print. And then when we did the camera test, I think I realized that it was too big a print and I needed to do something just a little smaller. So then we switched it over, which, cost us no end of problems, because we were like a week out from shooting and had to get, I forget the number of skirts we needed for the first episode of the day. Yeah, so we were a bit nuts. And we were getting that made, that was being hand batiqued and wax printed for us in Campea by a local artist. And it was his drum print. It's called a drum print. And, he was making that, him and his family, his son, and then they would take them to the DHL and send them to us. And we would get these few pieces of fabric and start working on those and whip up our skirts for the girls. And then, so that was like this little train of those would come, like every week we would get a little bundle of those things. And the same thing with actually our, the palace tunics, which are the striped tunics. Those they're printed a 10-inch strip weave fabric, it's called. And that's, originally how they were made too. So they worked with strip weaves. So they were strips of fabric, and they would stitch them together to make their garments. So we wanted them to be as authentic as possible as well. So we were looking for people to weave it, and we couldn't find anybody in South Africa. So we ended up finding this through this woman in Ghana. She ended up going north to northern Ghana and got these guys to weave it. And at one point, she had 9 weavers working for us, and they were all weaving these fabrics. And the same thing was happening. We had like a little train of those coming down to us. She would have to go up to that area, get the fabrics, bring them down, and then another person would bring them over to us in South Africa, because we couldn't ship. We couldn't take the time to ship. It took too long, so we had to get it hand carried. So it was a crazy experience. Just like the little bits of things would come, and then we would whip them up into something and get them onto people, and then the next group would come and we would do the same thing. So it was this ongoing churning journey of trying to get our costumes made.
Was there an effort made, or did you have to, I don't know if this would even be practical, but were you trying to use fabrics of the time as well? Or
I did. Yes. Initially I did, but it was very soon.
I don't know how practical that would be on a film set when you have to,
Yeah. It's not. You can only make like 5 costumes that way, right?
Yeah.
So, because we wanted to block print, I was like, oh, we're going to block print everything. We're going to make it ourselves. I mean, obviously we weren't going to weave it, but we used like a nice roughly woven calico that we found that they make in South Africa that's easy to get. And so I was like, this is what we can use, and we'll just dye that, and we can print on that. But it just took us too long. We could not. I think the only thing we did in time for camera in terms of printing was we made Nowie's dresses done that way. We block printed that in-house, the blue and green, the blue and yellow. And what was the other one that we did ourselves? And then we did like some of the king's robes. We printed the bottoms of the hemlines, and we printed a few other things, like some of the wives' pieces. So, but we weren't as successful as that as we want to be. But because we were building so much things, we had a really massive like fabrication department that were building all the leather belts for all the leads, the cross belts, and the jewelry, all the little armbands, all of that stuff we did in house. And we did a lot of things where Gina wanted things to be personalized, so we came up with ways to personalize things. We had this I call it like the tablet, where our head fabrication gentleman, Victor, had set up like all the little decals with the meanings of what they were, and each actress was allowed to come in and pick what they wanted to put on their symbols, like what do they wanted their necklaces, on their belts, and so on. So that was kind of a really cool way of personalizing their items, and getting them involved into it too, which I think they really liked. And it was interesting also to see, like, some people would just come in and pick really fast, and then others would take time, and then they would come back the next day or the next fitting and say, oh, you know what, I think I want to change that one symbol or whatever it was. So it was very cool. But yeah, that was another way of trying to make things more personal. So each person had their own little beat to their costumes, especially the leads. Like, we did that a lot with the leads. So
how many multiples of things did you have to make? Like, was there many? Was there a lot of multiples of the war?
Yeah, there were. I think like Viola. I think Viola may have had like at least 6 or 7 of her battle, and that was just her. And then her stunt also had multiples as well, because they both needed the dirty, the middle ground, the wet, all the different versions. And then I think she had 4 palace tunics too, because she had the one that had the stab in the back from Okia that she gets. And then when it got wet, it wasn't as usable. So we had to put that one, I think, in the back, not use it as much, from the jump in the water. So, a lot, enough. And then we actually ended up doing like shooting 2 units at once in January. I think we did that. So we needed more. Yeah, it was a bit nutty. It got really nutty.
Was that the biggest project you'd worked on? I mean, in terms of you?
Yeah, I guess maybe. Yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, I did a movie called Walking Tall, but I guess in terms of actual costumes, yeah, with Dwayne Johnson.
With The Rock.
I think in terms of
The Rock.
Yeah, I did. In terms of this is definitely the biggest thing. I mean, when you think of Star Trek, because of the way Star Trek is, a season of it, it ends up being very similar to doing like a Woman King. And it's similar in terms of world building too, because you're world building. So it feels similar, but it's different because it has that continuation, whereas this has a beginning, middle, and end, which is a different type of project. So yeah, no, definitely the biggest. And and it's the biggest build I think I've done in terms of that. I mean, besides Star Trek, because Star Trek as well, we built like 90% of what we made, and even the stuff we bought, we augmented like crazy. So it was quite a journey.
What do you go moving forward? What is some lesson you might have learned on the Woman King that you can impart to our viewers, or that you're going to take with you into your next large scale project?
Wow. Wow, that's a big question.
I know. Now that I'm like, I just figured maybe there was some little kernel of advice that if anyone else out there.
I don't know, because I feel like the real test for me was going through Star Trek and having come through the 5 years of Star Trek. It was 4 seasons, but 5 years for me physically of doing it. And also in 2 of the seasons we were doing the shorts on the side,
right,
while we were doing the heroes. So it was just like, so that journey, I think, really was the build-up for me for Woman King, and it gave me a lot of the fundamentals and things that we used for Woman King, like in terms of mass producing, how you approach that, how to track our building as we're going forward, so that we don't we're on time, just barely, but we can still just sort of feel when it's not working, you're not getting enough done in a day, that you may need to add more people or whatever it is that's required. But yeah, I do feel like, luckily for me, having had that Trek experience really, really helped me a lot for Woman King. And I did use a lot of what we learned there, we took over with us. Because even my assistant designer, Carly, came from working with me on Trek and came with me onto Woman King. So that was a good thing too. And that's something that I would say, always take somebody with you, or a few people if you can. Because that's something, it's like, as great as teams can be, it's always good to have somebody that knows how you work and what you do. So,
well, I love, as we sort of wrap up this interview, I love how you began your career designing, like you said, for dance crews, or designing for people you knew at a young age. There's a lot of young people that are, because of social media, whether it's Instagram, they can do their design work and put it up online and get feedback. Is there any advice you could give to the next generation? You've got people designing that might be in their teens in high school or something, and want to go into this as an avocation. What are some of the things you could tell people, young people today that want to do what you do?
Um, I think learning as much as you can from wherever you can. I feel like there's like almost nowhere that you can't learn something from, and I think that on each step that you go on, there's always something that's there for you to learn, and to be open to that. Um, I think that's really important. And I mean, it can be school, but it could also not be school. You know what I mean? I think it could be like working on a project. It could be, it comes from it really does, like working on a fashion show can teach you things that you can take on to use somewhere else. So I do feel like you can learn really anywhere, and especially today I think it's even more possible. And I think that what else would I say to people? I mean, I think perseverance. I mean, I've been in the business forever, and it's like I'm now being recognized as someone to watch. I think that's kind of funny. You know what I mean? I think of my career and how long I've been doing it for, and the things that put you on the map. But it's interesting because you mentioned Narc, and I had an interview the other day, and the director mentioned Narc, and I was like, wow, that's from the beginning. That's like way in the beginning of my career. You know what I mean? And that's cool. So it's nice to know that things that I did early, things that I think are bigger and important are the ones are not necessarily what everybody gravitates to. It's like interesting what people will look in your resume and say, oh, this is the thing I like that you did, or whatever it is. It's fascinating what people gravitate to. So you never know what it is, that's going to be your calling card, or the one you're known for. But yeah, I mean, I think perseverance and keep moving forward.
And like you said, you started in Saskatoon, so it doesn't matter where you
Mhm.
are. You can get to wherever you want to
No,
go through hard work and
absolutely.
perseverance.
Absolutely.
Do you have anything
Absolutely.
coming up that we should be looking out for that you're interested, that you're excited about?
Yeah, well, I just finished a limited series called On the Rocks. It's about Huey P. Newton and
Oh wow!
this Hollywood producer, Bert Schneider, who helps him escape to Cuba. And it's produced by Don Cheadle and Janine Sherman Barrios. Hopefully I said her last name properly. And so that's coming up. And then I am just about to start Captain America 4, Cap 4. That's kind of exciting.
Wow! That's very very exciting.
Yeah.
Now, are they going to keep? I really loved the Captain America costume that they have at the end of Falcon and Winter Soldier.
Oh, really? Oh, cool, cool, cool,
I
cool.
really like
Yeah,
that costume. Now I know when
yeah.
they first announced that they're doing New World Order, they used that
Mhm.
image. Are you going to redesign? Maybe you can't tell me, but
I can't tell you anything.
okay, you can't tell. Okay,
As you
never mind.
know,
I won't ask.
I'm
I,
now working for Marvel. I'm like, you can't speak about anything.
yeah,
You're
only
just like,
because I
all you
think.
can say is
Have
that.
you? Are you aware of a company called Hot Toys that makes very high end action figures? Do you know
Oh,
this?
no, I'm not.
Okay, that
No.
you'll learn because they make all
Uh-huh.
the Marvel characters, and they're like
Oh,
they're like
okay.
$300 each, and
Oh, cool.
and they
Cool, cool,
haven't
cool.
released that. They haven't released the new winged
A new,
Captain America
oh,
costume.
okay.
But look, I can't wait for New World Order. When do you start that?
I start, I think, either next week or the week after officially. And I think we're shooting in March sometime. I forget the actual date,
Oh,
but
that's very
March is our
exciting. Well,
shoot date.
congratulations on that. That's going to be.
Well, thank
I
you.
can only
Thank you
imagine
very
what
much.
that's going to be like because
Yeah.
that's you got that's a tall order. The Captain America trilogy with Steve Rogers was, of course, all of them are great. Now
Yeah.
you're moving into because in the comics, Sam Wilson took over the mantle of Captain America. So
Yeah. Yeah.
now we get to see the new man with the shield who had to earn it. I'm
Yeah.
very excited.
Yeah.
I mean,
Exactly. Yeah.
it's
No, it's same here. I'm looking forward to it
can't
and
wait.
what that world does. I think it'll be really cool. So I'm excited.
Well, I won't ask you anymore, but can people find you on social media? Do you have an Instagram account?
I do have an Instagram. I'm Gersha Phillips. Just
Just
my
Gersha
name. Very
Phillips.
simple.
Well,
Yeah.
Gersha Phillips, I want to say thank you so much for giving us your time and being on this podcast. It's been great to have you. Loved hearing about how you began your career and got all the way up to Star Trek and now to Captain America. How much fun is that going to be? Wow, I can't wait. And then I talked to
Thank
Ruth
you.
tomorrow. Is there any messages besides saying hello? Should I say?
Well, I just spoke to her yesterday, so hello is it. Tell her I'm still working on it.
Okay, I'll tell her that. I'll just say you're still working on it. Well, once again, Gersha Phillips, you've been a great guest, and thank you for appearing with us here on the Designing Hollywood show. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
That was great. Thank you so much for your
Awesome.
time.
Actually, I should have said thank you, Ruth, because Ruth helped me get that Captain America job. I forgot.
Well, hang on. Say. We can still say it. Say. Thank you, Ruth, for helping you get the job. Whatever you want to say to her.
Okay, let me think. Well, actually, I want to say thank you, Ruth, for helping me get the Captain America job, putting my name forward. That's what you did.
Fantastic. I'll add that.
I still think of her as a mentor. I know she says she's not my mentor, but I still think of her as a mentor. So
I love that. Because everybody needs a mentor. Everybody.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, well, I feel so lucky to have so many amazing costume designers that, to follow in the path of that have, they're just like, wow, there's some amazing work out there. And even like today, I mean, there's so many amazing people doing really, really fabulous things right now. It's fascinating. It's fabulous. Right.
Absolutely.
It's a great time.
It is a great time. I mean, we're getting period pieces, future pieces in the future, superhero. I mean, there's talk about a diversity of the kind of subject matter you're dealing with. It's everywhere. It's incredible.
No, it's fabulous. It's really fascinating. Yeah.
It's great.
Very
Well,
cool.
Thank you so much for being here, and I will let you go. And again,
all right.
Much
well, thank you.
your time. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks very much. It was lovely. Thanks.
Bye. Break a leg on Captain America.
I will.
All right.
All right.
I'll see you later.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye. And a very special thanks to our costume designer, Gersha Phillips, for appearing on the Designing Hollywood show. And a special thanks to our sponsor, Paris Costumes. Paris Costumes has been a part of the history of the European theater, film, and television industry since 1856 and has become 21st century tailors. A special thank you to founder and executive producer Martika Ibarra, co-founder, costume designer, the legendary Marilyn Vance, and of course, John Campea from The John Campea Show. Thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Tune in to the audio version wherever you listen to podcasts. I am, of course, your host, Robert Meyer Burnett, and you can find me on Instagram at rmburnett, or find me on Twitter at BurnettRM, or on YouTube at PostGeekSingularity. Thanks very much. Like, subscribe, and give us your comments. What would you like to see on the channel? Right down below. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode of Designing Hollywood.